Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dial the Gate, the Stargate Oral History Project. My name is David Reed. I am privileged to have Stargate's Robert C. Cooper back on the show to talk about specifically seasons 9 and 10 of Stargate SG-1. This was a pivotal period for the show. Everything changed. Some things stayed the same, but there's a lot of material to go through, and we didn't get to it all, but there is some interesting stuff along the way that I think you will appreciate. And so we're going to go right into it with him. Robert C. Cooper, writer, executive producer, and director, Stargate. Welcome back, sir. This is our 10th conversation, and it's been a minute since our last one, but I can't reiterate enough how pleased how pleased I am to have you back. So thank you for being here.
Like I was just saying to you off record, I am thrilled that people continue to want to hear about the show, that you want to talk about the show, and that you want to talk about it with me. So
You cultivated so many up and coming writers on that franchise, and I never have really spoken to you about something that we haven't covered. Wow, really? About cultivating those talented people over the years. I mean, Joe, Paul, Martin Garrow, Damian Kindler,
Alan McCullough.
Alan McCullough, little Carl Binder. He was so young when he came on the show.
Yeah.
What is it like looking back on their careers? And
Levine,
it's endless.
Yeah.
17 seasons of people. And knowing that you had some small part in that, or a bigger part in that, how do you look back on those people who have grown and continued?
Well, first of all, I had pretty good mentors who did it for me. I couldn't have gotten to where I got without Brad and Jonathan both sharing their experience and but also giving me the space to grow and make mistakes, and then ultimately learn everything I needed to learn to do the job that I eventually did. So in some ways I was just passing the torch that had been passed to me. I feel like though there's it's not as altruistic as it seems. I mean, it's a massive job that requires a lot of help, and nothing I ever did was all attributed entirely to me. It was I have often said that I only look smart because there were smarter people around me. And that's a problem. Some people don't do that, don't recognize that, and get threatened by surrounding themselves with talented people who are ultimately going to, if they're ambitious, want to take their job. But I feel like that's how it was almost by necessity. I mean, particularly what we're going to talk about a little bit today. We were making 2 television shows, 20 episodes each, at the same time with essentially one writer's room. We needed people, to step up and take on the roles of producing their own episodes, and then ultimately, in the case of Joe and Paul, take over and showrun Atlantis. So like I said, it was in our own best interest. Back at the beginning of SG-1, we knew from the outset, or at least Brad knew from the outset, that Jonathan was, not going to stick around forever. In today's world of television, it's funny that you don't even really often think about going 3 seasons, whereas we had that 4-season pickup, and likely we're going to get a 5th. And and so Brad knew Jonathan was probably going to go back to the US after season 3, and I was, you know, in there measuring his office and figuring out how to orient the desk.
You were talking about uh, uh, like bringing up younger writers. Like, I would imagine a certain bit of it would be, how do I want to phrase this? Not wanting to see them make some of the mistakes you did, having information that you had, you could choose to impart it or choose to let them make their own mistakes in certain things in terms of developing a script or developing a television series. But on the other hand, I would imagine part of you would have been like, I just I don't have time. We don't have time to wait for them to get it. There are certain things that I just, want to advise.
Sure, there's so many components to making an episode of
Mm,
television, and you just can't be everywhere at once. And
mm-hmm,
so, like, let's just say one episode, never mind 40, but for every one episode, you have a week in which, or a week and a half in which you have almost full-time meetings for prep, which is it's essential for you to be there because big decisions get made about locations and costumes and schedule and what scenes need to get cut or not cut. Like it is, you have to be there. And then you have the shooting of that episode, which obviously is going on at the same time as the prep for the next episode. And once you've shot a couple episodes, you are also on a very tight post deadline. So you're cutting, you're looking at visual effects, you're listening to mixes and all the things that go into post production. And so, you quite literally can't do everything and be everywhere. And so you need other bodies to participate in that. And I would say the one that's like writers are most comfortable probably in prep because that's obviously where the script is the most scrutinized in terms of the reality hitting the road of production, and then post because you are at that point in some ways the most in control of the way the show is going to come together. The one that scares the crap out of everybody is shooting, is set, because it feels from a writer's perspective that that's where you're most at the mercy of, the director, the cast, the production, and all the, you know, maelstrom of, production issues that come up. So I think that's the one that can be kind of intimidating, and that writers do have a little bit of seasoning. I know it took me uh, years to feel comfortable on set. I mean, the first time I went down to set, I was like all excited to be there and got a rather rude welcome from from Richard Dean Anderson and Michael Greenberg, and they were like, "What are you doing here? You know, you should be upstairs fixing this piece of crap script that you wrote."
Oh,
Um, so I mean, that is a place where, honestly, I I didn't fully connect with set even after as a showrunner. I mean, I didn't get a chance to spend as much time on set as I would have liked. It was when I started directing that I
mhm.
kind of got to know the crew a lot better. They got to know me. They So many people um sort of came up to me after I started directing and said, you're very different than we thought. There was this term called they used to say they used to call it carpet country, which was the executive offices because they were carpet, and uh, and they used to be like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. I'm getting called up to carpet country to talk to the executives, and they just have this perception of you
Mm.
as the showrunner or as a producer that you're like, the boss and this and somehow scary or whatever. But they're like, you're just a nice normal guy, and I was like, yeah, I've always been that way. um
They used to
but
shatter your expectations.
Yeah. So I do think that's one of the places where it's important to know when to interfere on set, when to
Mm.
step in and sort of upset the flow because things are not going according to the script in a way that's going to meaningfully creatively impact the episode. Yeah, like you have to learn to kind of feel the vibe and sense the rhythm of the way the set works. Um, and that just comes from being on set and really, figuring out how it works.
Reading the room. I've I've never actually really asked this. I've kind of gotten the impression that if a writer's script is filming, that they should be there for it, or should they stay away? Like if they are newer writers, do you suggest, or do you encourage, or do you demand that, hey, you really need to be down there to see your script unfold because it's an important part of your growth?
100%.
Okay,
Yes. I mean, you will learn when you see dailies too.
sure.
Hey, why did that come out that way? And it's like, well, because you didn't actually explain the geography of the room properly, or this scene actually had no dramatic through line, or
These are your blind
the actors
spots.
walked into it not knowing their motivations.
Yeah.
There are ways you'll figure it out when it doesn't work, if you're smart. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's wise to throw a green writer into a set supervision role. I think you should have somewhat of a senior producer on set
Mm.
feels they have the authority to intervene, who has the authority to say no, don't do that ad lib, or yes, we can cut this scene in order to make our day, which is really the most critical aspect of being on set. It's an equation, and probably the most um you know the most influential component to that equation is time.
Hmm. Heather Ash, we recently had her on, and she revealed that in the production for Beneath the Surface, which to this day I still think should have completely been shot in black and white, but that's another aside. She had Jack and Sam kiss. And when she got the episode, she saw Sam putting her head on Jack's shoulder and left it at that. And at first she was like, I wrote that they kiss. But then she understood that since she had been gone, there had been story written, particularly Divide and Conquer, that filled in that backstory far more than when she had left. And then she got it. She's like,
Mhm.
okay, this makes sense based on that. We've already kind of covered this. So we don't have to be as over like conking over the head by the time we get to Beneath the Surface. And it flows as a story when you put all the shows together.
Right. That's just a matter of uh continuity. Like sometimes writers are only involved for a period of time, and they're
Mm.
not really participating in the long running series
Hmm.
continuity or the mythology. It's hard. I mean, I've had opportunities to go work on shows with other shows before that have this huge story and mythology. They've been running and they've been on the air for multiple seasons, and it's like it's slightly daunting because I'm like, do I have to go watch 150 episodes in order to catch up and make sure I'm not making some suggestion that's been done 6 times on that show.
Hopefully, the unspoken word is that you're surrounded by people who invite you to lean on them, for details like that. I would hope, rather
Yeah.
than just throw you into the deep end of the pool, 150 episodes. Good luck, Sparky.
Well, we're gonna probably get to it, I'm sure, but it was one of the most, I guess, moments in which I initially had respect for Ben Browder when he came on board.
Right.
Uh, he literally watched. I mean, he's talked about this on an interview with you. Is he watched every episode of the show in about 2 weeks, I think it was, or less. And I
He
did
locked
the
himself
math.
in a room.
Yeah, but I did the math on it, and I was like, you had to have slept at some point because at that stage there were, what, 180, 200 episodes of SG-1. So
There was a lot of content, and you baked it into his character that he was kind of an SG-1 know-it-all, like, like probably sitting in his F-302 cockpit reading the next batch of mission reports, because that's where he wanted to be, and that
yeah,
was really cool.
yeah.
You guys had such a well-oiled production across all departments by from season 1 to season 10 of that show. Bridget McGuire, but I remember her saying on Dial the Gate, we could have produced stuff for NASA. It must have been just an enormous point of pride to see that this thing was so well put together. The artistry of the people, yes, but the technology that you had been able to take advantage of across that whole domain of time, stuff that you probably could never have imagined affording for season 1, you were doing routinely for season 10.
As we've seen of late, technology progresses at a
Yeah,
exponentially accelerated rate.
yeah.
So I mean, and we used to, like, we've had this conversation before too, is that we've had um, kind of our imaginations were always beyond where the capabilities of the
Mm.
technology was at any given time, and there were a lot of instances where we had to wait for visual effects to catch up. I mean, Brad mentions, I know he talks about Watergate a lot, where, I had this idea to do an underwater show, and I think it was James Teschner at the time, told us, yeah, we can't do that yet. And then he came in the next year and he said, you remember that water show you wanted to do? We can do that now. So, yeah, it's kind of fun. But I think, you're also talking not just about the practicalities of the visual effects and behind the scenes, but the ideas of the technology, uh, you know, uh, being kind of portrayed and then coming to fruition in reality, or kind of
there's
leading the way.
there's so much stuff that you can point to in terms of tech that was being developed that I'm sure fueled your imaginations. And now here it is willed into solid reality. Sam always had her kind of tricorder gizmos with the billion buttons on it. It was your
Yeah,
versions of the
that
devices to
really
get the
came from
story
Star
through.
Trek.
Yeah.
But I always look at like these robot dogs that are now out there running around, and I just start looking, look at the replicator behind you, and it's like, uh, yeah,
The Boston
very,
Dynamics would definitely be sending stuff through the Stargate.
yeah,
That they would. The Malp would look like anything that could walk around on 4 legs now at this point and carry on,
yeah,
like the military does now. They can load, I forget how many pounds they can carry. It's at least 75, 80 pounds of stuff, and they walk alongside the soldiers in the battlefield.
sure,
It's wild. Season 9 of Stargate SG-1 was almost Stargate Command.
that's true.
Can you tell that story?
We always felt like, and I think we've had these conversations before about the long running aspect of SG-1, and even just in general, the way in which we tried to keep the show fresh, um, replacing characters, changing villains, uh, the story of, we'll talk about also at 200, the story of uh, Brad and I trying to sort of end SG-1, make a movie that was the transition between ultimately Lost City and then what became the pilot Rising for Atlantis,
Mm.
and having Bonnie Hammer at the time say, "Oh, no, 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 we're not doing that. We want both shows to continue." Um, so I think there was just a point where we were like, how much of this, can we do, or do we need to, instead of trying to pump new energy into the old dog, maybe we can just rebrand and kind of refresh things that way. give it a whole new feel. We felt like we were transitioning a significant enough number of the cast and the leads
Mhm.
that it 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 was going to feel like a whole new show anyways.
Mhm.
Um, but I mean, I think at the end at the end of the day, it was, the studio and the marketing guys, and like to rebrand a show, to launch a new show with a whole campaign was going to be expensive and was going to not necessarily bring enough of a bump to the franchise as just the excitement they could build around the new cast members joining SG-1. So
Yeah.
that said, I still felt like the show had really kind of worn out the villains with the Gould, and we had kind of defeated them so many times. It was like they had lost their impact as a bad guy. Um, like we win every time was the joke. So coming up with not just new heroes, but also a new adversary was I felt important regardless of whether it was called SG-1 or Stargate Command.
I can see for the diehards who were on Gate World and who were on, the forums and everything else, they would have got the transformation. They would have seen what you were trying to do in terms of changing the name. But for the normie, everyday viewer who was turning into sci-fi, in hindsight, I really think that it would have confused them more than it would have helped. Like, what is it that we're watching? Is this the same show, or did they completely hand it off to other people behind the scenes as well, and it's just the same set? So what's happening here?
Yeah, agreed. Although, we did ultimately have a lot of scenes set in the SGC at the beginning of SGU, and that was a whole brand new show. So, I think we could have changed things up enough that it would have made sense. And then again, the arguments that went on were all about, are we are we going to bring a new audience in by rebranding and saying you don't have to have seen
That's true.
8 seasons of television. You can just start fresh now, and we're going to tell a whole new story with whole new characters. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of back and forth and debate about what it would cost to rebrand and what the value would be, and ultimately the decision was made to stick with SG-1.
Can I ask a little bit the nuts and bolts technical side of it for a second?
Sure.
So I've heard that it was possible, had the show been branded to Stargate Command, that it could have gone beyond a season 2, as it were, season 10, because of the rebranding. Like they could have done, a couple more seasons after that, put Arc of Truth in season 3, for instance, because of the rebranding. Were certain things cheaper if the show had rebranded? In terms of like cost for certain things that when you create a new entity, as it were, how does that work? And was there any truth to the potentially extending the life of the show beyond 2 seasons had it been Stargate Command?
The complicated um, economics of a show that goes on for a long period of time, if you start fresh, you start with you know new rates for things like crew. As you go on in a show, people get raises every year, and the
Mm-hmm.
cost of making the show gets bigger. So yeah, rebranding and making a whole new show would have brought the budget of the show down. Uh, that could have perhaps had that made the show go on longer. But the other, I mean, I mentioned marketing. I mean, the other issue you have is that then the contracts needed to all be reopened with sci-fi, whereas there's kind of an agreement that's already in place, and it's just, are they going to renew it or aren't they? And
Yeah.
so it was ultimately also just easier to continue to do SG-1 under the current contract.
Joseph Malazzi said that Apple had been, someone at Apple was a huge Stargate fan, somewhere near the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were interested in purchasing or acquiring the show for a season 11, a final season to be streamed through Apple in some way, or to be released through Apple in some way.
Well, it was at the time when there wasn't Apple Plus or what you have now. It was basically iTunes was at its, kind of peak for music, and they were starting to get into streaming TV shows and all that sort of stuff. And then they were starting to look at maybe getting into the saving shows game, because it was easier than starting from scratch, and they really had no idea what they were doing in terms of creating shows or marketing them. So it would be easier for them to just move a show over that was still sort of had all its infrastructure in place that they could then save. They flew Brad and I down to Apple, in California there, and we had a meeting. They were super enthusiastic, but I think at the end of the day, the money was just too much more for them than they really had the authorization to commit at that time. I mean, now they spend God knows how much on television shows. It's crazy. But yeah, no, we had that meeting. We instead ended up with SGU, which I wasn't unhappy about. I know the fans were not as at the time as thrilled, but
of course, well, hey, what Joe left me with the impression of was there was a clause in the contract with Sci-Fi Channel which allowed them to decide whether or not to release the show to another something, and they chose to exercise that and say no. So that's by your recollection, that's not the case. Apple just didn't proceed.
Apple, in my memory, I mean, that may have been true as well, but
Okay.
I don't know. Apple just didn't have the money to make it work
I see.
at the time. They were just not interested in paying what they need to pay.
Well, it's still flattering that you were considered. That's
Yeah.
really cool, because it says something about, I can't imagine, what SG-1 must have looked like in terms of downloads through iTunes, because SG-1, I believe, was on iTunes at the time through Sci-Fi Channel. So
Free trip to Monterey and Apple headquarters. So
I'm sure the cafeteria lunch was bombing. So, so Ben Browder introduced into the show. He's done his homework clearly. I can imagine that I'm sure that it's not a coincidence that one of the first things that he says is, remember, no matter what, we're going to here to protect SG-1 at all costs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that there would be an examination of the introduction of Jonas and how that worked, and a desire not to make the mistakes is not the right word, but the choices that were made to introduce that character when you're replacing and really replacing, someone like Jack for this role. Was there trepidation there? Was there we really want to nail this one and get it right?
well, okay, yeah, that's the creative side of it. I'll backtrack and just explain that when we were casting this, or putting out the idea of finding the part, I had a conversation with someone named Bonnie Hammer, who was the executive at the time, who was in charge of all of USA and Sci-Fi and the sort of Universal cable stations. I don't know what she does now. She's all the way up the food chain. And basically she said, get me Ben Browder. I want Ben Browder. And which puts us, like, she had obviously been involved, I guess, in Andromeda. And I had, not Andromeda, I'm in Farscape.
Yes.
And I mean, it puts you in a pretty difficult negotiating position with an actor when you have to make the deal. When
according to Ben, he was not told this either.
Yeah,
so.
Of course not. Why would I tell the agent that we have to close the deal? That's a really bad negotiating strategy. Anyway, yeah, it was not like we had some options or a decision to make. We had to figure out a way to make. Listen, I'm not by any means suggesting we didn't want Ben or that he wasn't a great choice. I'm just saying that that was there was definitely a passion for him to join the show from the studio.
There was an Atlantis push for him. I don't know if it was for Shepard. It may have been for Shepard. And then again, the commander of the unit going through the gate to rescue them at the end of season 1, Dylan something, the older gentleman. My understanding was that Ben was also considered for that position as well. So I believe twice on Atlantis before finally making the move for Cameron Mitchell.
Yeah,
does
and
that
I mean,
sound about
look, I
right?
mean, there was also some conversation about the fact that, I mean, Claudia had been on the show,
Yep.
and we were still, talking about how she could continue to be on the show, and we're like, do we really want to just make this, Fargate? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and uh, but yeah, I mean, whatever, we worked it out.
Absolutely, you did. And bringing back Vala from season 8, the Prometheus and Bound, hugely resonated with fans. What was it? Was it pretty straightforward bringing her in, or
Yeah,
was okay? Was
yeah.
this an
I mean,
intent? Like, we're going to have you in for a limited number of episodes. This is not the whole season run. Was that made pretty clear to her that she was kind of pinch hitting for Amanda? Or was that not a part of it at all? Could Amanda have come back and the two characters had run concurrently for season 9?
I'm sure Claudia would have an opinion about what was told to her. I don't remember exactly how
Okay.
it was all communicated, to be honest with you, but
Yeah.
I really feel like we had so many conversations about the sort of writing structure and mythological value, I guess would be one way of putting it, of 4 leads.
Mhm.
And like we just always sort of loved the way that you could kind of mix them up and you'd have two-handers and they would change, or or having the team of 4 with their each of their contributions. And 5, it just changes the
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah. Literally 4
You know,
people fit in
yeah,
a 16:9 shot.
yeah.
So
I mean, you can make it work, but
sure.
it was just different, and also, Vala was, look, such a dynamic character. She had such
Mm,
a very distinctive personality, and she had this uh, tendency, in a very good way, to draw attention to herself and take over a scene. And so, trying to figure out how to drop that bomb into the mix was also something that we were afraid. How is this going to change the chemistry and dynamic of the team? I mean, it was frankly just stupid to have that thought or conversation because she's so fantastic and turned out so well. Um, but that was maybe some of the thinking for testing the waters to see how it would work.
mhm.
Um, Without committing to it, you know, full on from the start.
Absolutely. And something clearly worked there, because at some point during season 9's production, when season 9 became a season 10, there was an offer for her to do a full additional season.
Yeah,
So something
yeah. I
worked.
mean, she was sort of undeniable.
And I think if there are through lines in the show, one of my friends said this once, and I have never forgotten it. If you can reduce SG-1 to individual aspects, or individual ideas, one of them is certainly that people are redeemable. And I've never forgotten that. I thought that was like a stroke of genius. I'd never considered that being the case, but SG-1 is one of those things where, when you see in season 10 her being handed those badges. Now, you've proven yourself. You've proven your worth. You have proven that people can change for the better. They don't, you can still maintain your rough edge scoundrel personality, but you're a straight shooter nonetheless. And those patches were a symbol of SGC saying, we believe in you, we trust you, let's move forward. And that was
You
cool.
know, I don't want to get into too much of this conversation because it could really drag us down a rabbit hole. But, you know, as I've kind of gone on in my kind of life and beliefs and the things that I read and get into, I'm sort of more and more inclined to lean towards the idea that we don't really have free will.
Mm,
And you know, this is a popular idea that causes a lot of people to you know, react badly. They
mhm,
don't want to believe that they aren't the master of their own domain or
mhm,
don't deserve reward for their good decisions. But, you know, thinking about even just the Gould, that's a human being that has something else in them controlling them and making them do bad things. And you take the Gould out, and suddenly they're back to who they were, and they're not the person who was doing all those awful, cartoony, bad things. Uh, I feel like we as a society fail greatly in blaming people too much for their bad behavior. We haven't got solutions that we are able to put in place so that what we have to do for now is build a wall around them. We put them in a prison or
mm,
whatever to keep them from doing harm. But it's a failing of our understanding of what is actually making that person behave badly,
mm.
um, that I would hope a future better version of us somehow figures out how to
And
manage.
and you brought up that in our discussion with I believe it was Lawrence, in terms of how chemicals can so radically change what our decisions are at any one time. It's not just everything else set aside. So I definitely
Yeah,
see.
a person who is
Yeah.
incredibly hungry will behave differently than a
Yeah.
person who has just eaten. It's
It's certainly true.
yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of examples of that, but yeah, hormones are something that we don't control,
Hmm.
that affect our behavior in significant ways, and certainly people with physiological um, deficiencies
Hmm.
or well, whatever you want to call them, abnormalities in the way their body is working, that affects their behavior.
Hmm.
And you know, again, all completely out of your control. I mean, there's all kinds of other you know, ways in which you can be influenced, coming down to the simply, you know, where you were born and who you were born to and all the things
Hmm.
that helped form you. But yeah, no, uh, I look at redemption as a very uh, you know, sophisticated and hopefully um, you know, positive way of examining, you know, bad behavior and the things that we can do to make, you know, the world a better place.
How was it having Amanda absent for those several episodes? What was, you know, the vibe in terms of uh the characterization of those characters on the page? What was that? Do you have any specific memories from
Obviously,
that?
you miss her, and you
Yeah.
certainly, you know, I mean, you miss Amanda. Her experience and personality are fantastic, and you know, you want that presence on set. But also, she was the character who contributed all the science stuff. You know,
Yeah.
like so you have a void, and then how do you who fills that void in a realistic way that feels like we're not just taking Amanda's skill set and grafting it onto someone else, right? So that was tough. Um, on the positive side, I see it as being, uh, if it's handled right, it's really just um, showing you how much you love that character in the first place, but also, you know, how you can kind of miss them and have them come back and contribute. It's not that
Hmm.
different from, Michael Shanks leaving for a year and Jonas replacing Daniel and then Daniel coming back. I mean, it's from a creative standpoint, all those challenges are a good thing, and
Hmm.
uh, it has a way of, I think, refreshing the show. If nothing more, just making you aware of how much you liked the way it was.
Well, I love. I'm interested to see, for those few episodes, what you thought worked with the Vala arc, and anything that didn't. Just a brief comment, if you have any. I mean, you guys threw Michael a steak with her and those armbands. I mean, those scenes
Yeah.
together, they're just popping.
The very basics of writing are that you you have to have conflict in order for there to be
Hmm.
drama, and and it's always interesting to me because the fans would get there was this line that you couldn't cross or you would upset them in terms of how much conflict you could have between the team members, right? So they wanted the team to be together and working together and on the same side and facing a bad guy who we were fighting. That's the adversary. But some of the most interesting scenes and conversations are between the team disagreeing with each other.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I feel like, Rick O'Neill was often the center of that, right?
Mhm.
So it would be his agenda or his position, his attitude that would conflict with either Daniel's, philosophical ideas or Carter's science. Like, we can't go in there shooting or the bomb's going to blow up, like that sort of scenario where there's conflict between the characters that is impeding our fight against the adversary. Um, so it's never great when your characters get to a point where they have so much respect and affection for each other that there's no conflict there. And that's where a show that runs for a very long time can get to, and you have to figure out ways to
Mm.
bring up reasons for them to, disagree or have a fight. And Claudia was this, you know, gift
Molotov
from
cocktail.
yeah, this gift from above that just was both, an asset and an antagonist within the team. And I don't feel like and I think the fans didn't know they liked her because she was so entertaining, but they also didn't know whether she was good or bad or had her own interests at stake or had the team's best interest at stake. So there was this exciting new element in the mix that just as a writer you you love, right?
Hmm.
Because you can have this level of distrust and acrimony and self-interest and all those things that make great drama.
I love their scene in the Quest Part 2. Daniel is, uh uh dying essentially, with Merlin's consciousness and everything else, and Vala doesn't want Daniel to give up, his life in doing this, and Cam says, congratulations, now you really are one of us. The
Mhm.
hardest part isn't risking your own life, it's watching your friends take chances with theirs. That is great. And
Yeah,
Cameron says, congratulations, now you really are one of us, you get it. She had that whole arc. It's good. It's good storytelling.
yeah. Thanks.
Ethon, the death of Prometheus. Did Prometheus hang on for a little too long? That was an intense episode, and an episode that I don't think that we really would have seen in an earlier season, when things tended to be, let's wrap this up nicely, past your own children will now learn, in the old way, their brains aren't permanently sucked out, you nuke a civilization at the end of this one. The show was taking more chances. The stakes were raising. I think I also glossed over the Ori a little bit, but we've talked about the Ori. That was it. Was it time to end Prometheus and bring in the Odyssey? What were the thoughts there?
Well, I mean, we've talked about killing characters,
Yeah.
and I mean, this was just, I mean, that's a very sort of emotional event, and
Hmm.
I think that um, this is like killing a character, but it's it's blowing up a ship. It's a little more of a intellectual exercise of, and I mean, it's emotional too, and I don't mean to diminish the you know killing of a lot of people on that ship.
Right.
It's a different idea when you're talking about a character you've gotten to know and love, and you see them potentially dying versus the idea of
Mm.
mass conflict and the the result of large amounts of people dying as a result. So I feel like in a way, trying to up the ante of the villain, of trying to sort of introduce the consequences. We talked, we wrote forever about all of the evils of the Gould.
Mm.
We needed to come up with a way of personalizing the threat of the Ori and the scale in which their uh, evil was going to kind of wreak havoc on the galaxy. So it didn't. It just felt like you know, we needed to show how bad it was, but also make it about us,
Hmm.
not just another planet. I mean, I love the fact that we were also dealing with the consequences of prior actions, right?
Yeah.
So it was how we had, and that was, we talked about that sort of thing all the time, where um, in a safe sci-fi world, trying to sort of reflect some of the politics on Earth and the way things happen. And there's all kinds of cases in which the U.S. would go into a situation for whatever various reasons to try and maybe make things better, or make them democratic, replace a regime with another regime, only to have that blow up in their faces and go wrong. I mean,
Low resolution thinking.
and so we just thought, hey, we were always jumping around the galaxy, meddling in other worlds. What if there were consequences to one of those events?
It made sense that eventually we would come across a planets where revealing the Stargate, and we saw a little of this with Kelowna Langara, but in this case, revealing the Stargate leads to nuclear war. And I think it's a valid point. I mean, there were rumors for years in fandom that the invasion of Iraq was over a Stargate, and it's in one hand, it's an interesting intellectual exercise and a little bit of fun to think of it that way. But you guys can actually, tell a story where one continent has this artifact. This artifact suddenly becomes a huge, tactical advantage. Not just being able to escape to other worlds, but armies coming in. What would another continent do about that? They wouldn't have a very good time. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Crusade, you and I have talked about directing that episode. Um, I have two things that I want to talk about for this one. One was the crazy 2-second shot of the whole wedding scene. When you're writing this episode, oh yeah, we were married, and then we see this huge shot, huge setup, huge costumes, set pieces, everything else. It's on screen for 2 seconds, and we move on. Um, what is it like, clearing that in terms of, like, do you think about that going in? It's like, yes, we do want to show this. It's basically going to be a gag. We're seeing this,
Yeah.
from Vala's whimsical perspective, and then that's it. Um, Budgetarily, is it worth doing a shot like that? Do you really have to factor it in? You know, because it's on screen for 2 seconds.
I don't honestly don't remember the
Okay.
specific arguments about that shot or that scene. That's funny. I
Okay.
haven't thought about that in a while, but I do think that, well, first of all, um, it was basically a clip show, right?
Yeah, from Vala's point of view.
You know,
That's right.
and what we were, I mean, it was an episode that was built to be uh, a budget saver. Like it was end of season way of making up some money. There was a shorter schedule. It was a lot of talking in a room that we could shoot in a very short schedule. So I suspect there was probably some crossover in terms of set and how we were able to, whatever location we shot that in, we were probably already utilizing paid extras for that day.
Mm.
And I mean, I'm sure I argued, hey, look, I'm saving all this money by doing this inexpensive episode.
I'm directing it myself.
We're gonna have some. Well, I still got paid for it, but
I know you did, but yes.
But yeah, there were unions involved. I think I was just like, I gotta have something.
For sure.
Yeah,
sure.
It was a wedding and some toilet seats.
Very, very large toilet
Yeah,
seats.
that's all I had.
Oh gosh, I love the ship's design. I would imagine, there was the original art of James Robbins had two main firing.
Yeah, it looked like eyes.
Yeah, I think that was the mandate somewhere in there. Do not do a Death Star. Do not make that look like a Death Star firing. Or
I mean, I guess I would say ship design. It was one of the most painful, unfun.
Really?
Yeah, just because there's so many that had come before, and you can always be like, oh, it looks too much like this one, or it looks too much like that one, or that doesn't look. I mean, I think probably the most difficult design thing that we did in the entire 17 seasons was the Destiny. Like we just could not figure out what the Destiny was going to look like.
And it came down to Brad and a cocktail napkin.
Well, it was that he finally decided he wanted it to look like a shovel.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, I mean, I just, I found it was like trying to come up with something that was different than anything you had seen before. But at the same time, look cool was, it was very, very difficult.
One of the disappointments, for me as a fan is not getting to see in the Ori Galaxy what an Ori Stargate looked like, because they had developed the technology completely independently. Emilius had left with his designs. Right. So they went on and created their own, and we get some kind of like an idea of what it may have looked like with their ring transport platform, with the white and the cool silver light. That was really cool. The Ori designs, I really enjoyed them. They were really cool.
Yeah, the production design on those 2 seasons was amazing.
Tomin, you had a tremendous guest star, Tim Guinea, with him. I get the impression, please correct me if I'm wrong, that his perspective changed over the course of the show. When he's introduced in Crusade, I get the idea that he's really looking forward to going out there and killing people in the name of the Ori. Like he's really looking forward to it. I'm going to prove myself because I've had this injury and the Ori have blessed me. To line in the sand, when he starts talking about with the prior, this is not how I was taught, we didn't interpret it this way. Sure, we need to, put certain people down, but no, I'm not as bloodthirsty as this. I believe in the Ori and I believe in what we're doing, but harming innocence, I don't know. Was that in there from the beginning and I misread the character? Or was there a need to, as we moved into the closure of this story, we really need to make this character a little bit likable in some way? We really need to give the audience a reason to root for him a little bit and not just say, oh God, finally he's dead.
Oh man, I love Tim. I mean,
Yeah.
Tim was, I just was like, how do we get more Tim in the show? He
Yeah.
was so human and brought empathy to a part that felt, like he was this tortured soul. And um I mean, and we've talked about this before, that the show was always um in some respects a anti-religious doctrine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to say we were anti-spiritual. I think it was more, how has religion been used for evil throughout history, for subjugation,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for empowering the few, um, and yeah, I mean, I think it was always, how do we tell the story of the people who had
Mm-hmm.
been subjugated by the kind of temptation of power and the promise of uh, whatever that religion was offering them. Um, how do we turn them? How do we
Mm-hmm.
make them see that what they believe is hurting them and others?
So it was always your intention to make Tommen a sympathetic character from the
Oh
beginning.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Well,
That makes
and I
sense.
think it was just uh, it was sort of obvious when Tim brought what he brought to the character, that it was always kind of there anyways, and you kind of had to go with it.
Well, he brings a, a lot. So I got to work with 20th Century Fox for some of the behind the scenes marketing content for the release of Arc of Truth. And in it, there is some B-roll of the torture scene in Arc of Truth. Hope I'm not telling tales out of school here, because he is pouring his heart and soul into this first take of screaming his guts out as the psionic torture device that the priors are employing on the characters is eating into him. And you yell cut, and then you say, um, Tim, save yourself some, okay? Don't exhaust yourself for all of it. We need you for a couple of times. Do you remember this?
Yeah. I mean, I was
He just poured his guts out into
oh
that
yeah,
take.
yeah. And I mean, I didn't mean to disrespect his contribution or effort
No,
at the moment. I just feel like sometimes you need to
pace
uh
yourself, buddy.
well, also just have some moments of levity after something
All right.
graphic and awful.
Yeah, absolutely. I admire his performance. I think that the greatest scene in the Arc of Truth, in my opinion, is the one between Tommen and Teal'c. Um, it is the one cue that I can remember distinctly that did not make it onto the Arc of Truth soundtrack, and I will forever curse Joel for doing that, because I think it is a moving piece of music. And I think
Mm,
it encapsulates those two characters, particularly Teal'c. This is what you do with yourself. Get over the fact that you will never forgive yourself, but fight for others. That's the
right,
least you can do.
right.
It's good stuff, man.
Mm. Yeah. I get a little bit sad every time I think about Joel not being with us. Yeah.
I think about him all the time.
Mm.
All the time.
So good.
Season 10. I don't know how far we're going to get into this, but I want to try. Flesh and
Sure.
Blood. We already talked about Emma's story and her introduction on film. Hello, Mother. Morena Baccarin. What a
Yeah.
coup. Holy cow! Was that an offer, or did she audition for that?
No, that was an offer.
Man, oh man.
I mean, we were all big fans of
Yeah.
her and the show, and obviously we had a number of folks from that show on SG-1. So
Absolutely. How do you feel Adria's story arc was executed? Is it something that you look back and say we really nailed this one, or I wish that we could have done something a little bit different with it, or had her on more? How do you look back on Adria, who is the Ori equivalent of a Harcesis? I'll never forget Brad taking us aside and saying that when we were first introduced to the character. She is
yeah,
the Ori equivalent of a Harcesis. That is her
yeah.
nature.
I don't really remember feeling in any way unsatisfied with the way
Mm.
that all turned out. Um, I mean, she's great. Uh, I mean, she's obviously gone on to some amazing things and shown some incredible chops
I think she's just
outside
getting
the
started.
genre.
Yeah.
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 Uh, I mean, yeah, I think it's funny how much sometimes reality and specifically pregnancies led to uh led to story choices, like, and good ideas, frankly. Like that whole idea was, we want Claudia back. Oh, I'm pregnant. Okay,
Hmm.
let's figure out how to make that, part of the show. Um, so yeah, I think that was I think it worked out pretty well. I mean, what's interesting is the resolution almost never happened because
Mm.
I couldn't get Morena for Arc of Truth initially. There was literally like and Julian
Yeah, Julian Sands.
sad situation with him as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Uh, but we had, I think it was like a 12-hour window in which all those actors were available. And we made it work. Like we had to fly people in and out and whatever. It was crazy. But if that day had not happened or gone according to plan, and we ended up shooting very, very late. We shoot an extra long day in order to get that. And I frankly made a rookie mistake as a director that day. But uh, yeah, we wouldn't have had her in Arc of Truth.
And it's not like there are no visual effect shots in that scene at all. It's only your finale.
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah.
Man, oh man, the stuff that had to have come together for that.
Well, and she's also kind of sadly shot, up against that wall separately so we could get her coverage
Yeah.
done out as opposed to tying her into maybe a better version of that.
Yeah. Like yeah, her a little bit more intimacy with her and Vala, but I the beat is there, as short as it is, so it is touched on. My regret as an audience member is not having more utilization of Julian Sands.
Mhm.
Uh, he's so big in Origin, and his gravitas was so powerful. I really got the impression that we were going to have him for a two-parter at some point in the show. I mean, as cliche as it may sound, the prior loses faith and comes to Earth, to spill all the beans. The Doci, excuse me. Was that a scheduling thing, or was it just the opportunity never came up in the story?
The Ori were, it's like in Star Wars, you would never have done Interview with the Emperor.
Yeah.
That you want, like, there's a mystique to keeping them at a distance. You didn't ever want to spend too much time with them.
Yeah.
I feel like it's yeah, it was just, there's something about the distance that made it more scary and powerful. You know, you want, Apocalypse Now, you didn't cut to Kurtz the whole time. It was like he was this mythological kind of entity that you only saw at the very end. So
Mm.
yeah, I mean that's kind of was the thinking, was he just didn't want to. He wanted to maintain the mystique of the bad guys, the upper echelon of the Ori. Uh,
Hmm. When you
I'll tell
pop
you
that
another
cork, it has
story
to be
about.
ready.
Sorry.
When you pop that cork, it has to be at the right moment.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, you know, you didn't ask this question, but I'll tell you the story anyway. I refer back to the scene in which Vala catches fire um, multiple times because it was so sort of, I knew it when I was writing it, and yet I wrote it anyway. But you become hyper aware of the danger you put human beings in by writing certain things. You know there's going to be stunts. You know there's going to be, and it wasn't. We had we were talking about fire and flame, and I was talking to Andy Makita, the director of that episode, about it. And it wasn't until we had the stunt guys literally came into my office and said, "Watch this," and he stuck his hand in a bucket of this goo and pulled it out and then lit his hand on fire. And to try and prove to me that this was all going to be, safe. Um, but when they did it, uh, I'm up there typing, and then she lights on fire. When I was standing on set, the heat that was coming off that burn was so hot. I can't imagine, like, just being that person, that woman inside those, you know, bandages and wrap and burning for as long as she did. I don't know that I would do that again. And not only that, I wouldn't have to. I mean, the visual effects could have handled that now. Like, fire was not super realistic back then. And everybody felt practical was the way to go. But yeah, that was a moment that I still think back on in terms of, you know, really sort of almost regretting the danger that I was putting somebody in for the show.
How many seconds was she fully engulfed? Do you remember?
Oh, a long time. It was a painfully long time. It was it was like 30 seconds or more, I would think. I can't remember exactly, but it was a very, very long time.
Is she holding her breath? Does she have an oxygen mask?
Yeah, she was holding her breath, I think.
What is the panic button? How do you signal if something
I
is
think there was a
wrong?
signal. There's a physical signal that she could have done. And they could have run in and put her out. But she was on fire for a very long time.
Wow. And as an
It was amazing.
actor, you're expected to portray a character dying, flailing, or some
Yeah,
such, and
yeah,
then keeling over and having the life extinguished inside of you almost.
right.
Pardon the pun. Um, that is just
It was it
I
was a, it was yeah, it was like a crazy thing to witness.
did everyone come down and watch that one?
There's a big audience for that.
I would imagine so.
And I was standing there going like, we're all standing around here watching this poor woman who could actually, be very badly hurt during doing this or worse. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess respect to stunt people is what I'm trying to say, but also, from a writer's perspective.
Is that something you have to go out of your way with the stunts people to ensure?
Oh my
Like
God.
we're going to light this person on fire. I'm sure there's a budget for that. If you killed her, that would have had to have been paid out,
Oh, that's built into I'm sure that's built into the insurance of the show and
So it
stuff.
wasn't a very unique special line item that had to be introduced.
No, 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 no. I mean, if it had been, it wouldn't have been done. I mean, there's
Yeah,
we expect this person could very well die. It it was very much proven to be safe by
yeah,
the professionals who handle that sort of thing. I mean,
absolutely.
my very first job on in television was on a show called Sci Factor,
Yeah.
which was with Dan Aykroyd. It was my first staff job, Damian Kindler was also on that show, and I was not really I was not allowed in production meetings. I mean, this goes back to our whole training people
Hmm.
conversation, right? And I remember I had written a script, and some people said something after the fact, after the shooting. I was asking questions about how did it go or something like that, and I got really heavily chastised. And they're like, "Well, because of you, our two leads had to be taken to the hospital." And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" And and they pointed to the script where I had written, the lead actor so and so gets blasted by some Arctic wind or something like that. And they're like, "Yeah, we blew these crystals through the fan and it got in his eyes and whatever." And I was like, "Why would you do that?" And they're like, "Well, because
Yeah.
it said Arctic wind." And I said, "I just meant it was cold. I just meant he should act cold." Like, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know why they did that, but it was like that was my first educational experience about
Wow.
the specificity of the script, but also how important it is to have the writer in the fucking, you know, production meeting so you can actually uh, clarify that no, you do not need to blow plastic crystals into the actor's face.
The execution of that isn't your fault.
No, no, no. I didn't really blame
That's
myself, but
oh, I'm good. I'm
yeah,
glad because I part of me would have.
yeah,
Jeez.
yeah, yeah.
What are you doing? Just
Yeah,
because
I
I
know.
write it doesn't mean you do it.
Well, also the sort of literal interpretation of Arctic wind, and for that matter, not having a safe version of whatever it was you were putting through that fan, uh, is also not on me.
What is the procedure when something terrible goes wrong? Had the actress playing Vala getting burned to death died,
Yeah.
would you have used that footage? Or would you have consulted the family for their input to see,
Wow.
well,
I don't think I don't know that that's something. First of all, it's so far from actually having happened. I
yeah,
don't necessarily want to go there in that conversation. I mean,
okay,
I would think certainly not.
yeah.
Um, it's interesting. It's happened before. I don't. You could probably find this out. I looked it up, but I mean, there are definitely instances where stunt people have died. I think a stunt person died on a motorcycle accident in a big movie in Vancouver, and
Yeah. And you got the whole incident from the Twilight Zone film and everything else. There's a lot there. So,
so I'd be curious. I mean, I was involved in a situation in which a camera person was hurt um, doing a stunt. He wasn't doing the stunt, but the stunt resulted in him getting hurt.
mhm,
The police get involved. It's all very serious. It's not a frivolent
mhm.
sort of situation that happens.
Yeah.
It's very you know.
Like Rick says, I wasn't going to let you die, Lieutenant. It's a ton of paperwork.
Mm.
So then maybe I've gone a little too far with that joke, but that's where my brain went.
No,
So
no,
I
no.
thought
It's fine.
gallows humor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyway, I mean that. I mean, I also felt like at the end of the day, that scene was incredibly powerful.
God, it's good. And I apologize for it passing my mind because it is one of the most visceral moments from the show. And I think going back to our earlier conversation, reflects that the stakes were definitely upped for this.
So
Uh,
I mean, she actually was on fire for so long that I'm remembering now that in the editing room, the editors wanted to pay homage to the stunt by having the scene, the shot go on longer. And I was like, we can't, I mean, it's going to be with screaming and music and everything. We can't have the character burning for that long. It's
no.
too graphic. Like we literally could not.
There's kids watching.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, just a beautiful performance. I can only imagine, Claudia, because you hear her dubbing, She sounds like Linda Hamilton did in the nuclear explosion in Terminator 2. You know, she
Yeah,
went there and she pulled that off.
yeah.
And she was great. So, Rob, this has been tremendous as always to have you back, and I apologize for taking so long between conversations. You have been a big part of the reason why I continue to do this, that we get to sit down and have these conversations, and I've got a couple more for you before I'm done.
Okay.
So this has meant a lot. This has meant a lot to me to have you back.
Well, it's always fun. I appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that there are people still out there interested in hearing about the show.
And I appreciate that you still have wells of memory of pulling these things out where it's
Oh
like,
no,
wow,
it's
I forgot about that. Yeah.
yeah, no, believe me, my memory is not very good anymore, but I do have certain things that are quite literally burned into my brain.
Well, we'll pull it out together.
All right.
That was writer, director, executive producer Robert C. Cooper. It is always a thrill to have him on to share his stories. I love mining that beautiful brain of his, and he's got more in there than he lets on. He likes to say that I don't. Some of this stuff is faded. You just need the right key to open the right door, and it's been my true privilege over the course of Dial the Gate to tap some of those memories and learn things that I don't even know, even though I, was reporting for the show right along the same time period. So we have a lot of content heading your way through the rest of the year. I am hoping to get a ton of interest back for the original feature film. Those interviews have not been scheduled yet, so let us pray. In the meantime, if you really enjoyed this episode and want to see more content like this on YouTube, please click the like button. It makes a difference with the show and will help us grow our audience. Please also consider sharing this video with a Stargate friend. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. And giving the bell icon a click will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this episode will be released over the course of the next few weeks on both the Dial the Gate and GateWorld.net YouTube channels. My continued thanks to Tracy, Anthony, Jeremy, Marcia, and Summer for making this show possible. My producer, Linda Gabber Fury, Frederick Marcoux at Concepts Web, Matt and Bryce, the guys who make my animations. I could do none of this on my own, and it means a lot to have them all participating. Keep an eye on dialthegate.com for the complete schedule as it evolves. It's where I go first to post any updates so that I can remind myself, so you guys can see our roadmap for the rest of Season 4. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate, the Stargate Oral History Project, and I'll see you on the other side.